Greetings to you in the precious name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. This is a second video in answering Dr. Sashi Tharoor as a historian. In the first video, we have seen that Dr. Sashi Tharoor has a very specific methodology in studying history. He only speaks from the Avarna viewpoint. He ignores the total Avarna struggles and their experiences, and he definitely ignores the completely collates the missionary history and the British colonial history, and then he has a special corner for the Islamic people. So as I said at the beginning, except for the fourth point, he would have qualified as a hardcore Hindutva itself. Now after the first video, there were some comments, very specific comments, saying that, highlighting that it is not just Dr. Sashi Tharoor. In fact, almost all the Indian historians follow the same methodology. I agree with that. So in this video, while I will be looking at the upper cloth revolt, I have divided this presentation into three parts. Initially, I will show how the entire historians have been dealing with this. And in the second, I will very specifically look at Dr. Sashi Tharoor's allegations against the upper cloth movement. And finally, we will look at very briefly the struggles, the sacrifices, the martyrs of the upper cloth revolt, which should be named as India's first independent Avarna movement. It was an Avarna movement that lasted for almost 50 years. The sacrifices which they made, the price that they paid, cannot be counted and cannot be recounted. It is that much sacrifices that they have made, and that has been purposefully ignored by the India's Avarna historians. So let me begin. As I said, I will begin with the problem of the Indian historians themselves, and then I will look at the charges of Dr. Sashi Tharoor, and finally we will look at the entire history of the upper cloth movement in a very brief way. One of the fundamental problems in the Indian nationalism and the Indian history is that it counts only the Savarna experience. In the book Dalit Studies New Perspectives on Indian History and Society, S. Ramanarayanan and K. Satyanarayanan has very insightfully commented this. They say, Prasad, they are quoting another scholar, say that Prasad illustrates the question of humiliation by discussing Mahatma Gandhi's experience on a train in South Africa in 1893. When Gandhi was evicted from the first class compartment, despite his English attire, his education in England, his status as a lawyer, and legal right to be in a compartment because he had bought a first class ticket. So while Gandhi was humiliated in South Africa, that made him turn against the Britishers. So a personal humiliation, a personal experience of Gandhi and similar Savarna leaders made them against the Britishers because they did not find the respectability that they had before now in the new government. Gopalaguru continues to comment the same thing. Now this is well and good. The entire Savarnas, if they have all human beings has to be respected, irrespective of whether they are Savarnas or Avarnas. And if a Savarna is humiliated also, he has every right to respond, and Gandhi had every right to stand up for his right. Now the problem comes this. The Savarna, when he speaks about his right, he tramples upon the Avarna's right, and he does not think as much as he has the right to fight for his right, and Avarna also has the right to fight for their rights. And that is the problem with the Indian history. They will look at the self-respect of the Savarnas and completely ignore the experiences, the struggles and the fights that the Avarnas fought for their own self-respect. Until and unless Indian nationalism is redefined as everybody's self-respect, whether they are a Brahmin, Dalit, Christian, Muslim or any human being on this in country, our India will not progress. Now the methodology in history also. They look at only the fights where the Savarna fought for their self-respect and totally ignores the Avarna's fight for their self-respect. And Avarna's fight for the self-respect is often against the Savarnas as well. As I said, this is not just Dr. Sashi Tharoor or the Congress, even the Marxist historian. For example, here I have the book by P. Govindapilla, one of the Marxist historians, an intellectual. And P. Govindapilla, this book is in Malayalam, Kerala Navodhanam, or Marxist Vishanam. The Renaissance Inc. of Kerala, a Marxist view. Unfortunately, you cannot find any contribution of the Christian missionaries in this. Unfortunately, you cannot find any space for the upper cloth revolt in this Marxist historian. Now you might say that Marxist has an ideology that they ignore the contribution of others and they take only the contribution of the people who are natives. No. If you look at it, page 43, he speaks about Annie Benson's contribution. So if he can speak about Annie Benson, he can as well as speak about other foreigners as well. No, but Annie Benson came and struggled for the Savarnas, therefore that is included. Whoever fought for the Avarnas, the Christian missionaries, they are totally ignored. This is a Marxist respectable historian. Same is the case with M. Sridhara Menon. He has written an extensive book on Kerala history, and unfortunately you cannot even find one page for upper cloth revolt, which lasted for almost 50 years. This is how they continuously ignore the Avarna history and the Christian struggles and the contributions to our land. Now, unfortunately, this is not just the Avarna historians and the Marxist historians or the Dr. Sashi Tharoor. Even Dalit historians, even when they speak about the Dalit struggles, they have continuously marginalized the Christian Dalits. For example, you speak about Ayyangali, you speak about Srinarayana Guru, but how many of you have heard about Kaipetta Habel, who was a slave who converted to Christianity and who was a warrior? Now he lived in Kerala in 1854. Kaipetta Habel should be remembered as much as Ayyangali should be remembered. Who heard about 1860 Yerugandala Pereyya, who led the mass movement in Andhra, led large number of Dalits? Is he not as respectable as a Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar? And who heard about Dr. Dith in 1873 in Punjab? Again a mass leader of the Dalits, who led for the mass Dalit emancipation. Why are they ignored? They are ignored and discriminated even within the Dalit history because they happen to come out of the Hinduism. So whoever questions and come out of Hinduism, they are also ignored. Unfortunately, even the Dalit historians, many of the Dalit historians, not all of them, Dr. Sanal Mohan, Vinil Paul are all are exceptions. But many of the Dalit historians toe the line of the Hindus Savarna, what they have drawn. Now, similarly, they can speak despisably about the Christian missionaries. Even when Dalit historian speaks, even when they can criticize, of course anybody can critique anybody. But known as the Puleya Padri, Puleya was one of the Dalit caste in Kerala. Now he was known as the Puleya Padri because he struggled for the Puleyas in Kerala. But when they speak about Reverend Shaumal Mittir, they can speak A Padri as if that priest, this priest, very disrespectfully. Will they do that the same with Ayyangali? Will they do the same with any of the Dalit, the other leaders? No, they will not. So when it comes to the Christian Dalits and the Christian missionaries, even there is a discrimination by even the Dalit historians, unfortunately. So why are we specifically answering Dr. Sashi Tharoor? One, because he is the most popular to present that viewpoint right now. P. Govindapilla is not known across India, but Dr. Sashi Tharoor must be among the educated classes in India. He must be as popular, sometimes more respectable than the Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So his words, Dr. Sashi Tharoor's words carries a lot of weightage. That is why we are answering him. Second, he is little more vicious. While P. Govindapilla has ignored the history, he hasn't tried to belittle that history. But Dr. Sashi Tharoor tries to do that. Let us look at it. Dr. Sashi Tharoor, in his book An Era of Darkness, he says this about the emancipation or the upper cloth movement. He says women were treated with Victorian paternalism and not little a misjourney. Institutionally, for instance, women on the Malabar coast who benefited matrilineal law and enjoyed vast property and social right, not to speak of bodily autonomy, were pushed to accept patriarchal shackles. So the entire movement led women from freedom into shackles, according to Dr. Sashi Tharoor. And he continues. He speaks about this to specifically speak about the upper cloth revolt. He says, southern Indian women whose breasts were traditionally uncovered found themselves obliged to undergo the indignity. Look at the words that he used. Indignity. Now covering has become indignified. Indignity of conforming to Victorian standards of morality. Now they speaks about Victorian standards of morality, and then that is a byword for anyone who wants to abuse the missionaries. Missionaries not only talked about the Victorian decency, they also brought the equality. Forget about for that matter, and look at how he continues. He says, leading to such missionary-inspired colonial curiosities as the breastcloth agitation from 1813 to 1859 in Travancore and the Madras Presidency. So he says, this led from freedom to shackle, dignity to indignity. That is how he viciously attacks the Avarna history, and therefore it needs to be answered. Same is the case with the palace Bhakta historian Manu Pillai. Manu Pillai also says in his book, The Ivory Throne, the Chronicles of the House of Travancore. Thus in Kerala, women enjoyed a position of singular importance, not least due to its matrilineal system of inheritance, about which more will be said later. And then he speaks about the dress code of the woman. So according to them, the women were very dignified, had freedom, and had a superior position. After the coming of the missionaries, they had to be in shackles. But there is a counter perspective, as I said by Reverend Shamil Metir in Land of Charity, which was a book written in 1871. He says, to mark the degradation of the women, women were forbidden to wear any clothing whatever above the waist. They were not allowed to carry umbrellas. The Avarna woman, not only they were not allowed to cover anything above the waist, they were not allowed to carry umbrellas, wear shoes or golden ornaments, or carry pots and to carry pots of water on the hip. To build houses above 1 story in height, you cannot build 2-storied house at that time, or even to milk cows, or even to use the ordinary language of the country. The Avarna people were not allowed any of these things. So it is not just one, but there are multiple things that the Reverend Shamil Metir shows that. Now this argument actually can bust the argument of Dr. Sashi Tharoor and Manu Pillai, because here you have many legal laws put together to bring out a perspective. It is not like isolating one incident and showing it as freedom, but when you compare the situation, the social situation and the legal system of that time, we understand that they were a mark of degradation. Now, Professor Elisa Kent, who is a professor in Sycamore College, New York, she has written one book called Converting Women, Gender and Protestant Christianity in Colonial South India. And in part 2, the conversion of the gender, page number 214, she says, she actually almost refutes Dr. Sashi Tharoor and says, certainly no one would want to impose the 20th century North American meanings onto the events of the upper cloth controversy. You cannot bring the second wave feminism and apply it to the Travancore, because it is in the second wave feminism these idiotic definitions have come into the definitions of as freedom of woman. Now not only that, she goes on to say, Professor Ken goes on to say, it was an exploitation. It was an exploitation. How it was an exploitation? Because the Nair woman, she cites, the Nair woman, though they were allowed to cover the upper part, they were supposed to uncover in front of the Brahman. because the Brahmin had access to the Nayar woman in a most exploitative way. So she says, in a similar way, the Avarna women were similarly exploited by the Shudra men. Shudra in this sense is Nayars. Nayars were historically and always considered as Shudras of Kerala by the Shankara Smriti and all the other Hindu writings. They were always considered as Shudras. So in front of the Shudras, the Avarnas were supposed to uncover in the same way the Nayar women were supposed to uncover in front of the Brahmins. So this is not just a degradation, this is an exploitation of the worst kind. And this has been recorded even in the royal history. Travancore State Manual Volume 2 Nagaya, page number 351, he says Shudra woman. Again, when Nagamaya uses the says Shudra, he also refers to Nayar. Shudra woman had as a mark of respect to remove their upper cloth in the presence of the members of royal family or persons of high rank. Much before, even 300 years before this upper cloth revolt happened, when a Muslim visited the Kerala, he also remarked this distinction. He says, Nayar women are not unveiled from sight of anyone, but while Brahmin women are kept veiled. Now this is the most important point. If Dr. Sashi Tharoor thinks that this is freedom, why were not the Brahmin women given the same freedom? The Brahmins were the lawmakers. Why did they not extend the same freedom to the Brahmins? Because they did not want their woman to be exploited, but they wanted every other woman to be exploited. And when it came to Shudras, Nayars, while their women were exploited, they similarly wanted to exploit the women who were in the hierarchy, the caste hierarchy below them. So this is what is happening. This was not freedom and this was not dignified anything. Same is given in the Shankara Smriti chapter 12, Pada 2. It says, Brahmin woman, whenever she has to go out, she has to cover herself. So it is very clear. Shankaracharya wrote this Smriti. That can be discussed later, but it was always believed that the Shankaracharya wrote this Smriti, and Shankaracharya very clearly instructed the Brahmin women to cover themselves. So did not the Brahmin woman had the freedom and the dignity that Manu S. Pillai and Dr. Sashi Tharoor speaks? Now when you see everything together, that one highest caste of people were covered, the people below them had to uncover in front of the people, the men of the high caste, and the Avarnas were not allowed to cover. You see this as an exploitation along with the other laws. So Dr. Sashi Tharoor is completely wrong. Now let us, before we go into the upper cloth revolts itself, let us ask one more question. Let us take for an argument's sake, if you really believe that the women had such a high position before the missionaries came, can you give us some social indicators? For example, if we say that in the 21st century men and women are equal, some social indicators are there. Take the education, the number of graduates, men and boys and girls are same. The number of doctors, men and women are almost equal. The number of engineers, the men and women are almost equal. So there are social indicators to conclude that in the 20th century we have achieved some kind of equality. May not be a perfect equality, but some kind of equality. So the time that you speak, can you give some social indicators that the woman had any dignity compared to a man? Now here we have a book written by one of the most authoritative Brahmins in Kerala, Kanapayur Shankaran Nambudiripat. Kanapayur Shankaran Nambudiripat he died in 1981, but he was considered as the foremost authority on the Brahmanical and Hindu issues. He had written a book, Nayammaruda Purva Charitram, the previous history of Nayars. In this part 1, he specifically gives us indicators. He has divided caste into Kerala society into different castes: Nayars, Kshatriyas, Ambalavasi, Eezhava, 4 different castes. About this, Eezhavas and Nayars constitute the major portion of the population, and he has given us almost 500 years of the list of the people from the prominent historical personalities from this caste. So if Dr. Sashi Tharoor is right, then we would expect number of women, prominent women also in this list. Let us look at the list. It is given in the chapter 4, page number 222 to 238. So for 400 years, almost from AD 1423 to 1820, you had only 3 prominent men from Idava community and 0 women. So 1820 we are taking it because 1820 is the upper cloth movement. The revolt has started in 1822. We are taking in the 400 years before that. You could not even find a single woman from the largest Hindu community in Kerala of any achievement. How about the Nayars, who comes as a second most populated Hindu community in Kerala? Again, 0 women in the number of the personalities, historical personalities in Kerala's history. Now you have 2 in Kshatriya community, but you cannot take the queens and imagine that was a common situation for all the women. For example, Benazir Bhutto was the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Just because Benazir Bhutto was the Prime Minister of Pakistan, no one in his sane mind would argue that the woman in Pakistan had a high position. That would be utterly wrong. So 2 Kshatriyas were there, but that doesn't prove anything. Again, Ambalavas is 0. So you take the communities, the largest 2 communities, 0 women in 400 years, even to write your own religious songs. We are not taking how many physicians were there or how many other people were, just write devotional songs. Even there, 0 women, not a single woman was there from these 2 largest communities. So what kind of upliftment, superior position are you arguing? But ever since 1822, you can see the number of women being increased, initially among the Nayars from the Nayar community. So the date that Sashi Tharoor says the dignity ended, actually their dignity started. And later, initially there was not Idava woman, but the men increased first. The number of prominent men increased first. You can think about Kumaranashan, Srinarayana Guru and many other people. The number of men increased first, and later women also started increasing in prominence. So if you take any social indicator, it is only after the arrival of missionaries that even within Hindu community, the woman had the upliftment. All the other sayings are just spurious. Again, one more question. If it was freedom, so if a woman wanted to cover their upper part, were they allowed? No. A voyage to the East Indies written in 1772, much before the arrival of the missionaries, by Francis Gross, who visited the Malabar, that part of Kerala. He says a woman who had association with the Europeans, an Indian woman who had association with the Europeans, went into the front of Attingal Queen, and Attingal Queen, just like the Taliban, mutilated the upper part of this woman. For what? Because she dared to cover the upper part. So if you dare to cover the upper part, if it is a freedom, then you should have freedom to cover or not to cover. Even if you take it for an argument, that is a freedom. But here you don't have a freedom to cover. If you are covering, then this evil woman, queen, mutilated just like Attingal Queen, just mutilated that woman, just like the Taliban which is doing right now. We will not praise Taliban, neither we should praise the Queen of Attingal. So that was the harsh punishment that existed then. Now let us come into very briefly, let us quickly look at the major milestones, and you will understand why it is so significant to highlight this upper cloth revolt, because this is a first and foremost Avarna independence movement in the history of India. It started, we can divide it into 4 stages, 1806 to 1814, with the arrival of the missionaries and the first enlightenment of the Avarna woman, and 1822 to 1823 second stage when the revolt had happened, the first violence had happened, and then there was a favorable court verdict. And 1827 to 1829, when the second revolt had happened, and then they had an unfavorable verdict from the so-called enlightened royal princes. And in 1858 to 1859, where there was again a violent persecution against the Avarnas and the Christians. And finally, when the Britishers forced the Travancore government to issue a proclamation in favor. So these four stages, if you look at very briefly, you will see it. 1806, Ringeltube came to Travancore. Ringeltube is the first Protestant missionary to come into the Travancore. In 6 years, the Avarna women were enlightened that they should cover their upper part. And to allow this, it was proposed to Colonel Munro. As I said in the last video also, Colonel Munro had a Christian convictions. So in 1812, Colonel Munro, then the resident of the Travancore, granted the permission for women who converted to Christianity to cover their bosoms as, this is from, I am quoting, to cover their bosoms as obtains among the Christians in other countries. So this was in 1812. Now this is cited in Nadars of Tamil Nadu, the political culture of a community in change by Robert Hartgrave, page number 59 and 60. Now why you would ask, why did he allow only the Christian woman? Did he have a conversion agenda? No. If you look at the British history, in 1772, the first Governor General Warren Hastings in judicial plan in 1772 declared that every religion can follow their own laws. Hindus can follow their own laws. So unless and until an Hindu rises and asks for the permission, Colonel Munro cannot give within the British agreement at that time. And in fact, if not for the intervention of the Christian missionaries, British colonialism would have implemented the second Manu in India. They had translated the Manusmriti into English to implement it in India. It was the Christian missionary intervention that gave any blessings that came out of this colonial time. So Colonel Munro could not have given more than what he had actually granted. I am just saying this because others will accuse Colonel Munro of having a conversion agenda otherwise. But this was again changed in 1814 by the Travancore government, because the Shudras of that time, Nayars, objected to it, saying that the Christian woman cannot cover like Nayar woman. So the circular was changed, the order was reissued, allowing them to cover the kupayam like a jacket, but not like the sari top. So that was disallowed and the jacket was allowed. So this continued almost peacefully as long as Colonel Munro was there. In 1820s, Colonel Munro returned back. The Avarna people had made great progress, and then a general outbreak had happened against women trying to cover themselves. So in 1823, 100 years in Travancore, chapter 3, the growth of 40 years, 1816 to 1856, page number 36, Isaac Henry Hacker writes this. In 1822, a difficulty arose with regard to the Christian woman wearing the upper cloth. Caste laws forbade the low caste woman, men or women, to wear any clothing beyond the waist cloth. And then he says, then the usual assaults took place. What are the usual assaults? What are the usual attacks? In May 1822, C.M. Agur in Church History of Travancore, page 782 says, the Christian Nadar women were abused, mocked, ill-treated, stripped jackets and upper cloth by the Shudra Nayar men. So this is how they insulted them. But we have the original documents and we can see actually C.H. Mead, who was a missionary there, attempted different times and obtained a favorable court order. Now all these original documents are given in the book The Liberation of the Oppressed Class, a continuous struggle by Dr. D. Peter and Dr. I.V. Peter. I am taking the original sources from their books. So 1823 court order granted the permission for the woman to wear, the Christian woman to wear the upper cloth. And this peaceful time actually lasted only for few years. And then came the third stage, 1827 to 1829. The context of this was the Ulliyam or Ulliyavela. The Christian Nadar men refused to work. Ulliyam or Ulliyavela, you have to work without pay. You are like a slave. Even the Syrian Christians were supposed to work like that for the temples in Travancore. So Ulliyam, the Christian Nadar men, refused to work on a Sunday because Sunday is for the Lord. And this is a declaration against all the upper caste that we are free and we will decide the whole day that we want to take. So this changes the equation in the caste. So with this, in Reverend Shamuel Metir in Land of Charity, chapter 20, page 279 says, one poor man was tied to the hind leg of an elephant and ill-treated for refusing to do forced labor without pay. So a man who refused to do what the Nayars wanted to do without pay, he was tied to the leg of an elephant. You know what torturous way that these people have been torturing the Avarnas. And then the violence started against the Christian Nadar woman. The persecution started. What kind of persecution was it? 100 years in Travancore, chapter 3. The growth of 40 years. Isaac Henry Hacker writes this. Individuals were persecuted. Houses and churches were burned. Further, S.S. Hector, in his paper in South Indian History Congress 1980, volume 1, Upper Cloth Revolt in the South Travancore says, Bibles were burnt, Christian women were stripped and flogged by the Shudra Nayar men. And even an attempt was made on Charles Mead's life. Charles Mead, who was a missionary, and they tried to kill Charles Mead as well. And this, you can see it in the original sources as well. In the source, Liberation of the Oppressed People, a continuous struggle, a case study, this is given. This is what Reverend Charles Mead had written to the captain of that times. He said, almost 500 people with bows, arrows, swords were coming to kill, destroy, harass the people. And he cites many examples. He again repeats the same. You can see it in the screen. They burned schools, houses, tied people to the posts, guarded by the elephants. They did all kinds of persecution against the Christians. And you can see in the court submission, almost 70 cases were cited as an example. 70 cases. This is a summary of the court cases that is given in January 1829. This is given in the Liberation of the Oppressed, a continuous struggle. You can see what are the kinds of abuses that they had to undergo. For example, the case number 3, case number 4, case number 5 and 6. People were shamefully abused. Women were shamefully abused. Upper coat torn. Case number 44. Husband was beaten. Wife was shamefully used. Case number 53. When a woman was asked to file a false case against the minister, a missionary, and when she refused, she was ill-used. You know what kind of abuse that these people do. And took her away. They took the person literally away. And case number 70, similar cases were against the people were abusing the woman, and you cannot go into the details. Such was the abuse and persecution that was taken against the Avarna Christians in the Travancore. And what happened? According to Dr. Sashi Tharoor, it was the enlightened kingdom, that was the kings were ruling, the Travancore kings were, and the queens were enlightened ones. What did these enlightened kings and queens do? They further victimized the victims. 100 years in Travancore, chapter 3, the growth for 40 years. Government chained the Nadar Christians. They flogged the Nadar Christians. They were the ones who were persecuted and further persecuted by the government. And finally, the government cancelled the order of the 1823 and issued an order that the Nadar woman cannot wear the upper cloth. They can wear the jacket, but they cannot wear the upper cloth. And again, as I said, Ulliyam or Ullivela was the initial provocation. The exception, because of the missionary persistence, exceptions were given on Sundays and exceptions were given for Christians not to work on in temples. And then they imposed new conditions that if you have to build a church, you have to take prior permission. And this is the most interesting part. Whichever religion you are following, you can follow whichever religion, but caste practices must continue. Whatever is the religion, caste versus must continue. This all order came from the so-called enlightened princes of Travancore. This is the enlightenment that they had. An appeal was made to the humility and the obedience of Christians to superiors. Reverend Shamil Mitir looks at it and says, it is not that Christians were not blindly allowed to obey any tyrant ruler. The Christianity opposes slavery and tyranny. You cannot call and say that, oh, Christians are supposed to follow humility and submission, therefore they must follow the queen. No, they are not supposed to follow tyrannical queens and slavery that is imposed upon them. And against them, the brave women warriors of Christianity, the brave mothers of the Christianity, they refused to obey the queen's order and they continued to wear the upper cloth. That was the fight, that was the valiance that they had to fight against this caste inhuman, evil system that was imposed upon them. So they continued to do that for a long time, and during this period, you can see that in the upper cloth revolt in South Travancore by Dr. S.S. Hector in his paper that was published in South Indian History Congress 1980, that civil disobedience of the great Christian mothers. During this period is where in 1836 is where Vaikunta Samigal, now Vaikunta Samigal, sometimes he is attributed, given the complete credit for the upper cloth revolt. But you must remember, he came after the second stage of revolt also. He came in 1836 and he also encouraged the Hindu Nada woman also to start wearing the upper cloth. So that credit must be given to him, but not the complete credit. The majority of the credit should go to the missionaries and even more to the Christian women of that time. Now that continued for a short time, and then the final outbreak of the violence happened in 1850s. The immediate context was the abolishment of slavery in the British India and also in Kerala. For example, in 1843, you had almost 165,000 slaves in Travancore alone who could be bought and sold like cattle. Now this history is also not taught. We are taught about the American slave history, but we have our own slave history which is worse than the American slave history and never taught to us. Now, missionaries are the only ones. They were the only ones who fought for the abolishment of the slavery in India, and they achieved it. And this was the immediate cause for the third outbreak of violence, that is in 1850s. And during this time that the Sibai revolt also had happened, and the Queen reaffirmed the policy, the secular policy of the British Empire. Now with this, starts the violence against the Nada woman or the Avarna woman, Christian woman in Travancore. And this is there in the upper cloth revolt in South Travancore. Dr. S.S. Hector says, South India History Congress 1980 Volume 1. There were riots, Taliban model terror is the word that I am using. Riots and stripping of the Christian woman in Travancore. Christians were beaten to death. 100 years in Travancore, chapter 4 from Jubilee to Senatory, page number 48. Not only 3 months of systematic outrage against the Christians. Dr. S.S. Hector, Upper Cloth Revolt in South Travancore, South Indian History Congress, Volume 1, 1980. 3 months, even Diwan siding with the violent preparators against these Christians. And you can see it in all in the original documents. In January 17, 1859, when Reverend Baylis is writing to the resident, General Cullen, who was the resident of the Travancore at that time, he says, the houses, the chapels are burnt, women's jackets are torn. Even if the women were not wearing upper cloth, but only the jacket, even the jackets were torn. And this is the interesting part. Reverend John Goss writes to the General Colonel at that time in January 21st, 1859, Muslims joined with the Hindus to persecute the Christians. Now this is the Islamic contribution, the Muslim contribution of the Travancore Muslim contribution to the Upper Cloth Revolt. They joined with the Shudras to oppress the Christians. Further, Shudras, Chettis and other castes, John Cox continued to write, Shudras, Chettis and other castes came with arms, knives and sticks to persecute. Similarly, Reverend James Russell writes to the resident. He says, women were stripped of the upper cloth and beaten. And not only this, on January 7 in the 1859, he says, Reverend James Russell says, women were stripped completely and committed the most obscene acts which cannot be described even. Such was the terror that was unleashed on this poor woman of that time, but they stood their ground. That was the valor that they had. They were imprisoned and not released. But finally, at that time you must be thinking that, oh, the Britishers were ruling. No, the General Cullen, who was a resident from 1840 to 1860, he was against the Christianity. This you can see in the Land of Charity, chapter 22, Recent History of the Mission, page number 297 by Dr. Reverend Shamil Metir. He says he was more Hindu than the other Hindus. So it was not that you have a Colonel Munro, that the entire Britishers, you have such residents also who were totally opposing. But even he was forced to change. He was forced to change because he understood the situation, and he understood this is because of the slavery emancipation. And finally, because of the British force in July 26, 1859, finally the Travancore government was forced to give the permission and freedom for the Christian and the other lower caste women to wear whatever they want. This is the great freedom struggle of the Avarnas. There are hardly any comparable freedom struggles in India compared to this, lasting for 50 years, undergoing various persecution, but still standing the ground. And this history cannot be, they cannot even find one single reference in the history books written by the Avarnas. So we are not just happy that they achieved this freedom, but we are also happy they awakened even the Avarnas. In the book Patambadam Nutandile Keralam, written by B. Bhaskaran, in page number 67 and 68, he speaks about Mannatha Padmanabhan, almost 110 years after this incident happened. From 1820, from 1931, almost 110 years, Mannatha Padmanabhan stands up and says, at that time, Nayar women, when they had to enter into the temples like Padmanabha Swami's temple in Trivandrum, they had to uncover the upper part. Now Mannatha Padmanabhan stood and asked, which God wants to see the Nayar woman undressed? And he fought against it, and he gave the right, and we are happy that finally the eyes of the Nayars were also opened, though it took 110 years after what the Christian woman spoke. So when Mannatha Padmanabhan spoke these courageous words, he was only echoing the Christian mothers who fought for their freedom and dignity for first time. But we are happy that finally Mannatha Padmanabhan took that stand. Now this is the great struggle, people fighting for their own dignity, freedom. And if that is not part of the Indian nationalism, what else can be the part of Indian nationalism? And this great freedom struggle is what Dr. Sashi Tharoor tramples under his feet. He mocks at it. And we will not bear any such mockery anymore from any Savarna historian, whoever they are. This history must be included in the history of the Indian nationalism, and only then India will achieve its true nationalism. May our blessed nation achieve its true nationalism by including the self-respect and dignity of all the people and not just the Savarnas. May the Lord encourage us to do that and open the eyes of even the Savarnas, just as he opened the eyes of Nayars in 1930. May God bless you.